And yeah, you are right. There's two parts to this. One that we worked on. One was the social media stuff, and the other is the cell phone evidence. And the defense cell phone expert is not correct. He's actually incorrect in a lot of areas. And I know this. The FBI's training school called Cellular Analysis Survey Team, their instructors are my business partners in another business. We know very well what's truth and what's not. And what you have is you have an industry of experts, so-called claimed experts that are not engineers. They have no experience. They've read this stuff out of a book. They've never went out in the field and actually taken radio frequency measurements or tested cell phone towers, and they're up there in court testifying. And
Mhm.
the individual they hired, unbeknownst to them probably, the software that he created has been daubered and others thrown out of court numerous times. They considered it unscientific. No, we in the industry do not use that software. The FBI quit using that software. Everybody did. It is well known in our industry. Don't use that X. Matter of fact, I have testimony from FBI officers saying they don't use it because it's not proper. And I can show you why, because I can explain all the theories behind what ZX does and why it's absolutely nonsense. And matter of fact, in an hour from now, I have one of the most leading experts for the intelligence community going to meet me here in my office. We're going through some stuff in another murder case, but we do things the right way. We don't get the luxury of being wrong. I mean, I have cell engineers on staff. My one cell engineer on staff is the guy who developed the technology that found Bin Laden. So we have absolute true engineers. The other two business partners I have are the head of the Wireless Information Center of Excellence for all 13 carriers. They have over 100 patents in their name. They have a PhD. They teach wireless engineering. They help write the 3GPP standards for the industry. They do drive testing for the FBI, and the FBI's actual Gladiator autonomous receiver. That's the tool they use in the field to do drive testing, text cell
Mhm.
phone networks. They are the owners and designers of that product. So
I love that.
without
We've
a
heard
doubt,
about
like,
that in court. Yep, we've
yeah,
heard about the
I have
Gladiator.
real experts here. They're, that what you're hearing in court is individuals that have attended the school that are taught by my business partners. And we own a school called 702 Cellular Academy where we teach this stuff. There's only a few lawyers that have ever been to that. It is a hardcore engineering school. It's a complete graduate program, condensed into a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But when you talk about like how do you vet something, like when it comes to experts, unfortunately I'm in the world of kind of like the wild wild west, right? We don't have a non-vendor, in other words, a vendor neutral association per se. You have law enforcement associations, and you have one that recently converted into a little bit of non-law enforcement because they were running out of money. But typically what you have is you have experts that get certified in the use of a product, but the real test of your skills is in court. The judge allows both parties to put their experts forward. They both sometimes don't agree to certain things. Most of the time, 85% of what they say they agree to. Both the prosecution and the defense experts say yes to many questions, and they're pretty much the same. Then about 15% they say, no, you're wrong, right? And that's when the battle comes in. And the judge is the gatekeeper. They get to decide whether you're an expert or not. So
Right.
there are processes used to determine whether somebody's an expert, and that is through what's called Dauber or Fry hearings. It's where you get to test the expert and say, are they actually an expert? And in my industry, there are a lot of individuals that say they're experts and they can go to court and the court will agree that they're an expert and they let the juries kind of sort it out. But you would probably agree with me if you've seen underneath their CV that they're not an expert, right? Just because you mowed the lawn once doesn't make you a lawn maintenance expert, right? So you see a lot of that in our industry, and there's a reason why. Um, if the prosecution's expert is really bad, right, and they have just a little bit of training, we want them on the witness stand. Why wouldn't we tender them as your expert? Please put them up there. So we'll crucify them, right? Well, absolutely. So a lot of times people get vetted as experts just because nobody wants to challenge them. It's just to get them on the witness stand to challenge them on the witness stand. Because if you get them thrown out, they may get replaced with somebody that's better, right? So you want the bad person on the witness stand. That's kind of trial
Right.
strategy, right? It's just
Right.
trial strategy stuff. But yes, we've testified. I personally testified 321 times in 49 states. So I testified a lot in a lot of trials. Most of my staff have testified numerous times in court, usually per month, usually 2 to 3 times a month. They're on the witness stand and they get tested heavily, and especially cases where we're up against the intelligence community, where we have cases where the CIA is the defendant, and they bring the best of the best, right? That's their job. So they hire the best firm they can, they hire the best people they can, they bring their own internal people, and it becomes a battle of the experts. But the judge gets to decide, who's the expert. But I'd say, yeah, I have some very, very qualified individuals that work here.
The prosecution reaching out versus the defense reaching out. So let's start with, I want to make it clear for viewers. To begin with, you were reached out to by the defense, correct? In
Correct.
in the state of Idaho versus Coburger. Okay. Now, what you said you did look at was the social media, right?
Well, no, at first they were consulting with us about the cell phone location information. And we, just taking upon ourselves, we just ran the social media because actually it was kind of interesting. We were doing internal training in our office, right? So we're like, let's put in Brian Koberger in the social media system and we'll spit out a report and see what relates to what. When we did, we found the connections between the two. And this was really early on. This was right, I think maybe a week after his name even came up. I think in the big grand scheme of things, this was like just another day of business in our office, right? So we ran Mr. Koberger's background check first. So we run a GBLA, GPPA, and NCIC background check, and then we use Clear as well, the same as the airports. We have access to Clear. So we run the background check so we can pull emails that was used to apply for credit cards. So we know we have the right email, right? When you're applying for a credit card and they give you a credit card, you most likely have the right email, right? And it gives you confidence ratings in the system. So it'll tell you this email address has been used, 25 times to apply for credit or a phone, or you get a phone from Verizon Wireless and you've used that email address. All that is recorded into what you call your credit header profile. We pulled the credit header profile first, just phone numbers, emails, aliases, all that stuff, and we loaded it, right? We loaded into our system. And then we were looking for the social media because at the same time, we also got contacted by Inside Edition, which contacts us often to work on stuff. And they says, hey, can you take a look at this video file from this, they call it the mac and cheese truck, right?
Yeah.
We need that enhanced. How fast can you do it? And they usually call us like at 2:00 and ask us to have it done by 3, right? I think it was like 60 minutes because they have to go on air really quick. So things are fast. And sometimes we tell them no, sometimes we just don't have time to do it. Sometimes if we have a little time, we'll take an hour or two of our time and we'll do it for them. But you can't be compensated by them. That it's their news. They're not allowed to pay for that type of stuff. So we were doing the audio video of the mac and cheese truck for Inside Edition. So we said, now let's just run this through our social media system and see what comes out. And we did. And then what we found, I thought was pretty important because I had at least caught enough news that a bunch of individuals are saying they didn't know how they were related and it was just random. And I said, well, I'm looking at some data that shows that it's not random. They knew each other, right? Enough that they were connected via, I think it was Instagram. And so we decided not to work with the defense. We decided it's probably not in our best interest. Our decision wasn't based on the social media data. It was financial because, this is Moscow, Idaho. They don't have like a huge budget over there, right? Yeah. A state case with a $3,000 budget like this, you're not going to get through reading the discovery in $3,000.
Right.
Just
I
thousands.
totally get it now.
So it was a financial decision. And then, it wasn't like whether we thought he had a good case or not, but clearly when we saw the report about the cell phone evidence, we all kind of chuckled and go, that's not right. None of that's right. It just doesn't make sense.
So now, when you're looking at these things, are they providing you raw data? Is it a forensic download of the device? Are you looking at the actual device? What are you just looking, what are you actually viewing to create what you do?
Well, most cases start with a case review. And when I say that, what that means is we get all the paper discovery to start with. And then we know from the paper discovery what they have in evidence, like what digital, we work in the world of digital data, right? So I'm looking for, evidence like cell phones, computers, GPS trackers on vehicles, that kind of stuff, audio recorders. Um, and we look at that. Then we look at what do we actually need to go look at? Because sometimes they clear a device and say there's no evidentiary value in it. Well, that's for them, but that may be evidentiary value for us because it may build an alibi defense, right? So if law enforcement has two devices in, let's use an example, if they have two devices um, in evidence, one is a Garmin GPS tracker and another one's a cell phone. And their report they wrote says we're estimating the cell phone coverage to be within 4 square miles of the crime scene. Well, I want to look at the GPS tracker, right? Because that thing's probably super accurate and get you precision down to like 1 square meter. But sometimes you'll see law enforcement says, well, we're only charging you with the crime that has to do with this device right here, and totally ignore the rest of the evidence that could build the alibi defense. So we decide and we write a letter that says, this is the discovery you're missing. And here's our next steps. This is what we need to do. We need to go look at this evidence. And sometimes the evidence we have to go to the law enforcement center to analyze. We have portable equipment that goes out in the field. We have a bunch of equipment that goes on planes, and we take it with us. It's cases of computing equipment. And then sometimes they send it to our office. They pack it up. So we get it like, cover the name. We get a box like this in it, and it has, this one has an SD card in it. This is evidence in a case. Sometimes it's, hard drives. Sometimes it's actual like Garmin device or the cell phone itself they'll send to us. But law enforcement typically doesn't let original evidence leave their lab. They send us a copy of it. But we know whether that copy is correct or not. There's forensic tools have authentication methods in them, and you can tell whether something's been altered or changed.
So when you looked at the cell phone location data for this, did you go to the lab to look at, to do like with your portable, or did you get, was that a paper documentation?
They didn't either. They're using billing records from like your cell carrier. So the same thing, like if you have Verizon Wireless or AT&T and you go out and print your bill and it shows all the phone calls you made, there's a type of billing record called a CDR. It's called call detail record. Now you as a consumer actually have access to this. If you go in right now and log in, there's an area you can go to in there that actually shows your CDR. That is not normally what most people go do because it's buried down in your kind of like customer support portal. And it adds a couple different things to a typical cell phone bill. So a typical cell phone bill, you'll get the person you called, whether the call's outbound or incoming, the two parties that are involved, the two phone numbers, right? And then what it'll give you in these CDRs, which is interesting, is the actual cell antenna that was used. Now, not cell tower. Towers have multiple antennas on them, but the actual antenna that was being used and the azimuth of that. That means which direction it's pointing, but that doesn't mean that's where the radio signal goes. Just means that's the direction the antenna is pointing. So in a typical cell phone tower, let's say, and there's 3, 4, 6, and 8 sector towers, but let's take a three sector tower, you would have three antennas, one pointing, let's say 90 degrees, one pointing like, possibly 270 and 300. So they're not exactly aligned perfectly. It depends on If you're on the edge of a town, you want all the coverage to go one direction. You may have two of them pointing to the west and one pointing to the south, and there's none pointing to the east. So they're not exactly always 360. In most cases, they try to build it 360. So it will tell you those things in a CDR, but it does not tell you the GPS location of the phone. That's often confused with what people call in the industry pings. That is a term that is typically reserved for when you queried the phone remotely and it answered back to the cell network as to the location of the phone. That is like an E911 service. That has to happen live at the time of the incident. So because nobody knows this crime was being committed, then nobody's pinging the phone at that time. What they're seeing is billing records, and
Okay.
what law enforcement does is they take those billing records and they try to estimate cellular coverage from that, but their methodologies are horribly flawed, like beyond flawed. They're so flawed that the IEEE put out a white paper stating that none of what they're doing is supported by any engineering science whatsoever. And I teach at a school along with a couple of professors and David Burgess the right way to do this, because the way that is being used in court over the last decade is just nonsense. Like, it doesn't even make sense at all. It's so far from reality. And it the problem was you had a couple officers that learned how to do something, they adulterated it, and then they went and taught everybody in the US the same thing. And then you have a bunch of defense experts that went to the same school when they were a cop.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have cops teaching cops bad science, and it becomes like the de facto standard of bad science. And I'm out here telling them, hey, the world's round, and they're saying it's flat still. And I'm just kind of chuckling, like, I will embarrass you in court badly, right? Because, right, it's their religion. They do this every day. And then when they get confronted and somebody hands them a textbook this thick from a college and says, look at page 200, that looks nothing like what you're drawing. That is nothing like it. And they're reading it for the first time. They're like, well, I went to this 2-day school and how to plot dots on a map and draw arrows. I go, that's great. You're an Excel magician, but that doesn't make you an engineer. It's like, so that's kind of what's going on in the industry. And that's why ZX got in trouble. They drew these little funny blobs on there and said, this is a cell phone coverage.
I was literally going to ask you about the wedge versus the amoeba that he's talking about. Like, he's like, well,
neither one of those are correct.
Amoeba formation.
Neither one. So I can actually show you what they can query your phone as to the location of your phone and the radio signal strength to multiple antennas, but that data is not kept around very long, usually 2 days. Okay. That is because it just monitors and tries to help the health of the network. Let me.
That's interesting.
I will
That
share my screen with you. I think I can. Can I present? Yeah, I can present.
I believe so.
See that thing right there?
Yep.
That's one cell phone tower. That is not 120 degrees. That's not the triangle. If I was to draw the 120 on here, here would be the beginning of it. It would look like this, right? That would be my 120. See the orange area? That is where you can make a phone call. And you're probably like, why can you make a phone call the opposite way of the tower? And I'll explain to you why.
Okay.
So, wait a second. There are, in cell phone towers, antennas do not broadcast in a nice triangle. We all wish they did. That's not the way it works. So you have what's called a main lobe, side lobes, and back lobes. That's what cell phone coverage really looks like. Okay.
Okay.
One antenna, not cell tower. One antenna on top of the tower. There's 3 of them. If you want to know where they're getting the 120 degrees from, see that part right there?
Yes.
That's the main lobe. That is not the total coverage. That is the best coverage area.
Okay.
That means if the victim's house is right here and the perpetrator's house right here, you could very well be sitting on your own couch at home, and at the same time, the cell coverage says you're at the crime scene.
Okay.
Now, the distance on a 4G antenna, theoretically, okay, let's not talk about terrain, environmental factors, height of the antenna, all that, 23 miles.
Okay.
So the antenna covering the crime scene could very well cover Brian Koberger's home.
Own home.
Could be
Yep.
sitting at the couch. Okay.
Okay.
Second of all, the width. Okay. You could be looking at 12 miles. So you're talking about a massive area, right? So, and then you say, well, what about the backside? Here, three backside. There's backside lobes. You could actually be the opposite direction of the cell tower.
Like approaching it or
You could
moving
be
away from it.
you could be anywhere within the backside. So the tower could be facing north. You could be actually south by a mile and still connected to the tower north.
Okay.
So here's what happens.
That makes sense. Okay. That makes sense with what I've been hearing in court too. Got it. Okay.
So here's what happens. You got a cell tower, right? You got the cell tower here, and you got a cell tower here, and you got a cell tower here, right? You could actually be right here heading this direction and be on this tower here. You connected to that tower, right? Hypothetically. And as you move towards here, you don't even connect to this one. It connects you to this one while you're heading that direction.
Interesting.
Because cell phone networks are multi-layered. That means you have cell towers that cover boomer cells that can cover a whole city. You have layered, and then you have to take it by band. Every phone call is made on a specific frequency. You take a cell phone here, right here, this cell phone right here, and you look at the box that it came in, and it says it has 3 frequencies it operates on. Let's use Sprint, for example, 700 megahertz, 2100, 2300, okay? Let me give you a good example. When somebody drives by your house and you hear the bass and it's boom, 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 and your walls are shaking, that's because it's low frequencies. Travels really far, has lots of power, penetrates buildings. High frequencies, the tweeter, the hi-hat, that kind of stuff, do not go through buildings. They don't go very far. So the lower frequency you're on, the further away the tower you could be, the higher the frequency, the closer you have to be. So frequency makes a huge difference in these cases, but what they did is totally ignored that. They just left it off, but they had access to it. They have access to it because it comes on the CDR, and they can match it up against the capabilities of the cell tower, and they would be able to estimate coverage, how far out from the cell phone tower you can be, okay? Then, on top of that, you have to use, let me show you here. This is called detail records at the bottom. And you notice how it says band 13 channel frequency. It's operating at 751 megahertz right there. Right. You know, right here. That's the difference. And this is kind of a network density map showing all the towers and how they're located. And it gives you an idea of the density of cell phone coverage. So you can see if you're in the red section out there, you're probably not going to get a phone call.
Okay.
It's the middle of the Everglades, I think, down there, conservation area. You're not getting the phone call because it's dead. They don't have any radio signal. But anywhere in the orange, yellow, green, and blue, you're going to get a phone call. The blue's the best, and then as it goes out to green, it's a little worse, and then yellow gets okay, and then orange is pretty sketchy coverage, right?
Okay.
So, and that's the way we build these maps out. And basically, the way this works is this. If you don't know what frequency you're operating on, you don't know how far from the antenna you can be. Okay, number one. Number two, cell antennas don't broadcast at 120 degrees. And ZX's little crazy amoeba they put on screen is just complete nonsense and made up. If anything, cell coverage looks more like ectoplasma from Ghostbusters on a wall. It is all over the place. It is scattered. And there's big, giant, huge section way out in the left. Here is those images you're looking at actually are from a murder case involving some individuals down in Florida where they're blaming Kodak Black for ordering the hit. That's his case. That's what we're working on. And we actually have the defendants 21 miles from the crime scene at the time of the crime.
Oh my God.
They're nowhere even near the crime.
Oh my God.
They clearly didn't commit the crime. Man, I'm not saying they didn't know about it, but
they didn't do it at minimum.
No, they didn't do it. And so what happens is if you know the frequency, you know how far you could be. Okay, what theoretically. And then when it comes to Koberger's case, what's interesting is they showed him driving south down the mountain and coming back up, right, around the mountain. That's impossible. You know why? Because there's no cell phone towers there. in the bottom. None at all. There's zero measurements. They just made it up because they said we have a point here and a point here. And we think based on driving speed, you drove from here to here. It's not necessarily true. According to people, maybe he was hiking and he connected to one tower and connected to the other tower. You're on the edge of the mountain, which explains why you can connect to one and then connect to the other and not even be in a car, right?
Yeah.
And that is very problematic for the prosecution because the science that they use is not science. It's junk. It's made up. It's completely made up. These 120-degree pi wedges are not supported in any engineering science. The IEEE says it isn't. Real cell engineers don't do things that way. They use what's called the Longley-Rice model, and they do what's called RF propagation models. Now, you say, how close are those? They've been tested. Universities have tested this. They use this in the field every single day to estimate coverage. All cell carriers do, and they were within 3% of reality. That's how perfect their measurements are. I mean, to give you an idea, in Memphis, Tennessee, there are 299,244 cell towers. I know that because we just worked a case there. That is a lot of cell towers. Their cell towers are in buildings, strapped to the side of a building, big, huge metal structures. There's cell towers all over the place. They aren't just necessarily big physical towers. Okay. Out of those towers, you know how many have a coverage of 120 degrees? 12. Sorry, 12. That's it. So using 120 degrees is an exception, not the rule.
Okay.
So what they've done is they've thrown some data on a nice, pretty map to sell a judge the idea that they could get a search warrant. That's what they do. But the individuals that do this, they don't know the difference. They've been told this, they've been trained this way, they've been taught this way. So let me give you a little peek.
I also heard that on stand from the individual who put the PCA together. So that makes perfect sense. He has already openly admitted that he didn't know what he was doing there and that he did it based upon someone else's instruction. Mm-hmm.
Always. They hang, so the testimony usually goes like this. I went to a school and they taught me this in the school. What's your scientific basis behind it? The school I went to. Who's your instructor? I don't know. Where did you take the class at? I don't remember what city it is. Do you have any materials from the class? No, I don't. Do you have any independent research you've done after the fact? No. Has anybody told you otherwise? No. Is this commonly used in the industry? Yes. It's used by 6,000 law enforcement centers across the United States in the same methodologies. Yet any universities peer review this? No. It's like you're fighting a black box, but the judge goes, well, let's let the jury work it out. The jury's not smart enough to work this out. This is complex stuff, right? So let me show you cast. Let's see here. So here's the field resource guide for the FBI. Okay. What's interesting is, let me go through this. This is kind of like their little training book on cast. And they talk about cast viz. Okay. They take call detail records, plus the tower list. The tower list is where the physical structure of the tower is located at, longitude, latitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And notice this little parameters by all sectors down here at the bottom, this little section right here. They get to choose 60, 90, 120, or 360 degrees and how far out it broadcasts. They just click a button. They don't even know.
Okay, that makes sense.
They just click a button. And here's a historical CDR. And then let's take a look here. Now take a look at this. This is what's interesting. What you're seeing here, right here, is the typical 120 degree, and I don't think I can annotate on here, but this 120 degree pie-shaped wedge over here. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what you see in all their maps. But on the left here, if you take a look at that little black dot there to the left of that red arrow, if you drew the 120 degree cone there, you're probably like, why is there green lines to the left, to the backside, outside of this 120 degree cone? Let me tell you why. They drove test that area and they could still make phone calls on that cell tower. Okay. Even in the opposite direction of the tower, because they're on the rear lobes. This is the FBI's own training book saying so. And I've also put tons of FBI officers on the witness stand and asked them the same exact thing. And they say, yeah, you can connect to the backside of the tower, and they hem haul around. Then you have these rules that say is general rule of thumb, a tower's range can be depicted by 70% of the distance to the next neighboring tower. That is nonsense because they're multi-layered. One tower could be underneath of another tower. And then you have downward tilt on antennas too, which changes the mechanical and manual downward tilt, which changes the coverage pattern on the ground. Also, general rule of thumb is you'll get dauberted for that. That is not allowed in court. We have to know for sure. We have to give a scientific opinion. There's no such thing as general rule of thumb for court. There's actually law that says you can't use general rule of thumb evidence. Great.
Okay, that makes sense.
And you'll see stuff like, give me a second here. I think you'll find this interesting. It doesn't have to do with this case, but it definitely has to do with another. See this letter from AT&T to the FBI about Nilos saying don't use it. It's not correct. But they still use it in their court cases. This is literally an email as part of their training guide saying do not use this data, but they're still using it in court cases to put people in prison.
Okay. Are we sure that this doesn't apply in the Kohberger case?
They didn't have Nilos records.
Okay.
Nilos are a very specific type of record right up here. And this is what you call ranging data. Ranging data is called OTDOA, observed time domain, time difference of arrival. I'm used to using time domain reflectometry, which is electrical engineering terms, but OTDOA has to do with, I go to the Grand Canyon, I yell, Andrew Garrett, and I hear it go, Andrew Garrett, and it comes back to me as an echo, right? That is the distance it took for my signal, my voice to hit the other side of the Grand Canyon and bounce back.
And bounce back to you. Okay.
Then you know when you're a kid, your parents told you when you hear lightning, count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and hit 10. That means it's 10 miles away, right? That's exactly what's going on. They're sending a signal out to the phone. They're bouncing it off the phone, and they're measuring the time difference and saying, based on this, the phone is X amount of distance away.
Okay.
So that's what these ranging, it's called ranging data. So you got Nilos, PCMD, RTT. Those are different technologies. TrueCall, different technologies across different mobile carriers. TrueCall is created by a guy named Vladon, who's I know very well, and in his former company called Newfield Wireless, and that's what T-Mobile uses. That was what was being used in the Melly case.
Okay.
So in the Kohberger case, they don't have any of those technologies and it being used. Now, that data isn't, that system that tracks this stuff isn't always deployed in every area. It's by case basis. Plus also a lot of these, if you're doing like a wiretap order, they'll deploy these technologies on a phone, but you would have to know somebody's potentially going to commit a crime ahead of time, right? In your case of Mr. Kohberger, that is not the case, right? They didn't know ahead of time. So Nilos, PCMD, RTT, I haven't seen any of that data in the case yet. That's what's called ranging data, but that only tells you how far out from the cell phone tower you are, which could be this big arc, right? There's an arc. So cell tower coverage comes out here with some back lobes, and they go, well, you're this far away distance. You could even be that far in the opposite direction. So these are, there are major problems with the methodologies that's being used, including by the methodology used by the individuals that make the software, because the individuals that make software are former cops that went to the same bad school the rest of these people went to. And hence why you ever wonder why in all these cases they never have a cell engineer testify. There's 300,000 of them in the US. Nobody's testifying. None of the cell engineers from the cell carriers are allowed to testify. They don't want them testifying.
That makes about sense, huh? I never actually have seen like a person from an entity, one of that, major cell carriers come in, and I've never seen that. You just made me realize that.
Yeah, they never do. And it's on purpose. They won't call them. They refuse to testify. So here is a shameless plug here, but here's our school, right? And you can share that on screen. We actually have a school that teaches this entire certification process of getting certified to be able to do this stuff. We cover all the technologies, estimating location and legal how to get this stuff, how to read the FCC's documents. Our our instructors are just phenomenal. I mean, it's Dr. Visa, Kosinick, and Dr. Zach, and then there's me and there's David Burgess too. David wrote the software for the CIA that does cell interceptions. So he worked in interception technologies. And Dr. Zach, all of them, they work. I mean, they're professors at Florida Institute of Tech that teach cellular engineering. They're amazing, right? So that's unfortunately, the reason we built this school is because we saw so many people doing this incorrectly that were just guessing, right? They're using these pie-shaped wedges and saying that's the arrow and that's the direction, so that's the directionality of where the phone was at. And to date, right now, since we kind of really took this serious a couple of years ago, it's been a while since the government hasn't pulled their data out of the case. Every case they've withdrawn all the cell data for us. We get involved in the case and they just pull it out. In Koberger's case, here's what you can tell. If you want to see where direction, in other words, you want to be able to plot some dots on a map to say somebody went from here to here to here to here because the cell tower could broadcast 5 miles and these are more than 5 miles apart from each other, you can build a pattern in history of where somebody went. Absolutely, without a doubt. That's something. But to say somebody's sitting on the corner of First and Main Street is a whole different story. That's not, you can't do that.
That makes sense. So
now, if you get the phone, the data in the phone is highly accurate because it has a chipset inside. And I used to be vice president of a company called GPS Core Technologies. We are the ones that develop the software in your phone to allow your phone to talk to the chipset in the phone.
Okay.
So the chipset in the phone receives signals from outer space in the GPS constellation, and that can receive anywhere from 2, 3, 5, or 7 towers, antennas, per se. The more accurate your reading is. But the reason Google Maps knows, which I worked with them back in the day, this is where this is all started. The reason they know you're in the left lane versus the right lane is because that receiver in your phone is highly accurate. So the third-party applications, we call them OTA apps, over-the-top applications. Those applications that sit on top of your phone, Waze, Google, Life 360, hiking applications, those are highly, highly accurate. There's absolutely, if law enforcement gets that data from the phone, there is no arguing that data is not correct. That is absolutely 100% accurate and very accurate as to not only the location of the phone, but even with satellite drift and everything a defense expert could throw at it, you're still going to be able to place somebody in a house.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense because, like,
set of data.
Yeah.
One is network data from the cell carrier. One is data from the cell phone itself.
Okay, because that makes sense to me as someone who I used to DoorDash. So the app, it can tell when I'm in my house versus when I'm in my driveway versus when my car actually pulls out and now I'm on my street. So that explains that then, how those kinds of things work and how they pretty much, or it's a way to relate it, at least is a better way to say it. It knows exactly where you are far more precisely as you move around, even like a piece of property.
Yes. Like we're in the Koberger case, my understanding so far is they have some pictures with some GPS data embedded inside of it. And then, but you have to be careful on that. Somebody could text you a picture that has a GPS location inside that does, and you save it to your pictures, but it doesn't mean you were there.
Okay.
So and then they have call detail records, which is the billing records from the network carrier. That's
okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, if we can transition back to the social media thing, because I am really interested in the connection that you were able to make. So from your document, I gathered that you did, find it must have been a slew of guaranteed, like, emails. It was on like the 3rd page or so, but it looked like emails, usernames for Cash App and All Trails. It looks like you found a Twitter. And then are those the things that you then used to make sure that the Instagram you were looking at was actually Brian's? That the prosecution's experts, they can't do what you've done here.
Well, I mean, there's no real talent on our end to do this, honestly. Like, this is all done by software, you know. So they showed me their product, and I said, I'm really kind of blown away. Like this is pretty awesome stuff. I says, all right, I'm gonna approve this. Well, a couple of deals later, I says, can I buy from you, you know, my company? And I don't think they'd ever thought about selling outside of the DoD, right? You know, it's one of those things. And they said, sure. Now they actually sell to people outside the DoD. They created their own division to do that. And it's got some less capabilities in the DoD, but it's very interesting. And hence came a request to buy the software called Shadow Dragon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I vet this company, right? And then they allow me to buy their software, and then before you know it, they asked us to be the managed service provider. We got really good at using their software. And what it does is it does this. So typically, let's talk about you and I. If you and I right now go to Facebook and you type in my email address and click enter, you will not find me because Facebook does not allow you to do that type of search.
Okay.
So typically, let's say you and I search on Facebook for my email address, it doesn't come up with me, right? But in Shadow Dragon, it would.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because there are application programming interfaces, we call them APIs. This is what advertisers use to query networks and get your data and find out what your interests are. Those APIs, there's public ones that everybody knows about, and then there's private ones nobody knows about. Now, the law says it's got to be public in order, otherwise they would consider it kind of like an invasion of your privacy. So these things, these APIs were private, they became public, but they're not well known. There's a difference. So it's like if you bury your API on a web page somewhere that nobody can get to, it's still public. It's just not accessible, right?
Okay.
So what Shadow Dragon has done is they've combined all these into one system, and they basically created a tool that allows you to search through massive amounts of social media data. So for instance, if you use an email address to sign up for Facebook and you have an alias, that alias could be related to Instagram. That Instagram could be related to a phone number. That phone number is related to your Cash App. Your Cash App transactions will show up because you can query them. You start putting all that stuff together, and it really just kind of builds this huge worldwide map.
Is that the image that I'm looking at on the front of your document?
Yeah, it's
A
this kind of
visual
like
of the web?
yes.
Okay.
So it's just basically a huge um, visualization map of the connections between everything. Now, that doesn't mean you vetted everything, and it doesn't mean it's 100% accurate. But it's very interesting to think that if you use the email to register for one thing and it found the email somewhere else, you know, linked together, um, it basically it makes it very interesting that that email would even be used on something else, right? You know, so what happened was is we had this thing, nobody really cared. I mean, nobody really knew about it. So we didn't take the case. So I just shotgunned it to the because I heard the news and people were saying they didn't know how they were related. So I shotgunned it to the family's attorney and I says, "Hey, this looks like the connection between the two." And I didn't even get a response back. They didn't say anything to me. And then, you know, a year later, you approached me and said, you know, where'd you get this from? And we created it, right? You know, we didn't do it by hand. We used some software tools that do it. All right, here we go. Take a look
Okay.
here. Okay. This is
a visualization platform. And what this does is allows us, let me go in here, you can see the connections. So as you drop in somebody's name, it will footprint out and show you the relationships. It shows you here. I can go in here and say, I want to see more information about this. I want to extract the user information. And it starts building out this map.
Okay, so the map and then everything that comes from the map, you can
like
pull specific and pieces of information, download those as well, and that's how we fill in the pages behind the map. Okay.
This is a case where this individual right here was accusing a man of raping her, and we found by using this data a secret account with Proton Mail. We found that account was related to a dog's Instagram. That dog's Instagram was related to an alias. That alias was related to another account that linked all the way back to her FetLife account, where she was advertising for forced rape play and to sell the rape videos.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So this tool is super powerful. And when I click a button, it'll rearrange everything. Shows you like, so I could take this map here and I could just rearrange stuff and rearrange and show the social connections and how those things grow apart. I mean, this is very, very powerful tool. Like, right, hub and spoke model, who's doing stuff. Now, I could take a single alias and say, okay, give me everything about this, right? I want to know their connections, who they're connected to, how many people they're connected to, who's posted to stuff. I could take a single an account and say, get me who's following that account, get me those accounts. And it takes a couple minutes, per query, but then it'll start footprinting out all these connections, and this map can get really messy really quick. I mean, you can get to 60,000 entities in 30 minutes or so.
Okay, totally get it. I totally get it. So when I'm looking at the document for Brian Koberger, I see is it Twilio or Twilio user?
Twilio user.
Okay, yeah. Twilio, and it looks like there is a cell phone number there. Is that, was this number connected to an account? Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't vet any of the data, right? I kind of just sent shotgun this off, so like you're gonna have to vet it yourself kind of deal. But given here's the deal. In order to be friends with somebody, sometimes they have to add you, right? So you can't have a dead person add you. You got to put two and two together, that if somebody's dead and deceased, and somebody tried to fake an account and build one after the fact, they can't get the other person to add you as a friend because they're dead, right? They don't.
Now, if their account is like a public account where you can just follow them and you don't have to have a request, approved.
Yeah, you can follow them.
Okay. So that,
and sometimes it requires approval on that and stuff, but we didn't vet any of this data. This was more like a thread to pull on. And then what we do from these reports out of Shadow Dragon is we go through and start vetting all the data. But so we were on to the next case. We did not stick around, and I just shotgunned this off to the family's attorney, and said, hey, I know people said there's no connection. I'm seeing this connection. You might want to look into this. And that's it. That's kind of where we left things until.
Not to mention the Twilio number. I was asking about that because Twilio they provide services to DoorDash. And that night there was a DoorDash at nearly the exact time of the murders. So I found that to be interesting as well. And it kind of makes your document seem more credible. But for whatever reason that it is, the prosecution's experts are having a very hard time following and finding that same information that you found.
Well, it could be that the social media company took it down too.
Well, I mean, if they believe it at first, then that would be a problem.
Well, what happens is they get So this is kind of interesting. If you go to facebook.com/preservation, I think it is, or instagram.com/preservation, you can type in your badge number, social media account, and hit enter, and it will preserve the account and put it in the suspension state so nobody can see it.
Okay. Okay. So
You do not have to have a court order to do something like that. You literally just click a button. So there could have been 50 officers all looking into this, and any one of them could have clicked a couple buttons and had this thing locked down where nobody could get to it.
okay. That makes sense. That makes sense.
So yeah, so those things disappear all the time. We're like, well, what happened to the social media account? Well, law enforcement locked it down. They just put in a preservation order, and as part of that preservation order, now when I say that preservation order, there's exigent circumstances. They just go in and click a button. It's not like they actually have an order from the court. It's just called preservation order, right? So that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Now I have a question as well, pertaining to because he did follow Kaylee and Maddie. If Kaylee's Instagram has now been legacied to her family and they still have access to that, is there a way to find the past connection to Koberger from Kaylee's Instagram?
Possibly, yes. I mean, if we have the person's username and password to actually log into their account, this thing even becomes way better, right? We're looking from the outside in, but if we're looking from the inside out, these maps become much more detailed into other data. Plus, we can also do like a full archive of the whole account. I
Okay.
can look at the past. There's log files that are kept within the account that tell you the specific information.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
So,
makes a
and
lot
I'm
of sense.
sure that Idaho's now has the full attention of the FBI and Secret Service and everybody else involved in this case because it's a high profile case. So they're getting assistance, probably, my guess is, from a place called the National Domestic Communications Assistance Center. That is exactly what they're there for. Officers call them and say, I need to get Instagram this, I need to get Facebook this, and they help them write legal process to get that information. They write help them write the motions. They help them get the data. They have the relationships with the cell carriers,
That's
so they get
awesome.
all that. That's their job. That's their role. It's a huge facility, and that's all they do is help law enforcement get that data.
That's awesome. Potentially. So I was wondering like what those were. In that list, you also do see Kaylee and Maddie. So it is some sort of connection, but is it people he followed, or did those people follow him in return? Did those
I
people
think
not?
it's both.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
you're going to see both in there. Yeah, you're going to see following and following from.
Oh,
Now, there is, I'm more worried about not deleting a data. I'm more worried about overwriting data. So if somebody deletes something on their mobile phone, there's a likelihood we can get a lot of that back. It depends on what type of data, right? Of course. If they delete a picture, most likely we get the picture back. But if you download 4 massive Hollywood movies to overfill your phone and overwrite the prior deleted data, then I can't get it back,
that
right?
makes
Then
sense.
it's overwritten, and that's more of a problem than deleting.
Okay.
Overwriting is definitely more of a problem.
Okay.
But yep, I got to run. But feel free to reach out. I appreciate you taking time. I know you're passionate about this. You sent me a few emails asking me, and I've been running around the world. I was in a trial 2 weeks ago in Georgia. I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, working on a case with an American locked up abroad last week. Just flew back in yesterday. So I travel the world doing this type of stuff. I'm passionate about this too, passionate about the truth and using forensics to get to the truth. So let me know what you hear. I'm interested, and I'm not working for the defense, so the family is free to call me. I know they're working on some stuff. If they want to call and talk, please. I know you may have a direct line to them. Tell them to give me a call. We'll have a chat. I feel bad
Thank you
about
so
what's
much. I
happened.
appreciate that. They'll be so happy to hear that. Thank you so
Yeah, I
much.
think, I look at the case and sometimes people always say, well, you do defense work. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We don't defend anybody. Attorneys defend people. We look at evidence. We write about evidence, and there's no spin to it. And a lot of times we write reports that tell our client they are guilty. We tell them, look, you don't want to go to trial. Here's what's going to happen, and here's the truth of the matter. and they take our report and they go, wow, I should probably take a plea deal. And I said, yeah, I would highly suggest you take your plea deal, because if you go to court with this, you're just going to get, it's going to be an end of you, right? You're never going to see that side of a jail cell. You probably spend life in jail. And they, so it's interesting. I think I heard something about the family suing the police department or something like that.
Yeah, you put it
Anytime this type of stuff happens in some like rural America, small town cops, I cringe, right? Because they don't have the resources to do this. And unfortunately, and this is going to sound like a dig on law enforcement. It's not, it's just reality, right? Arrogance prevails. Everybody thinks they can do everything. They don't ask for help from anybody. And that's it. I mean, the typical mentality of law enforcement is they are the only ones with the license to investigate. But I'm sorry, as you could tell, most citizen reporters like yourself have investigated this more in depth than the law enforcement unit has, right? And that happens all of the time. And they rarely reach out and say, we need help. We don't understand how to deal with this. And by the time they do, they've trampled all over everything. They've trampled all over the evidence. People have screwed things up. It's a mess in the media. Instead of just saying, we need to call the governor's office and say, I need everything you have, right? I can't do this. But it has to start with them. They are the only ones that think they have a license to investigate, and they don't want anybody else doing or touching anything they have. And it's a bad mistake. So that's why in this case, I fear the defense may have the upper hand on law enforcement in this, because law enforcement has to come to the table and say, we learned from the very people the defense hired. They were our instructors in ZX school, right? Or, and nobody's getting the right people involved.
I totally understand. After today, I hope that someone will at least feel some kind of pressure to get the right people involved.
They better get the right people involved, because it's going to be an absolute crap show. I mean, we watch it on TV all the time. We watch national trials. We're shaking our head going, that's not right. All of us, the entire forensic industry's online messaging each other like these are idiots on the witness stand. But, poor attorneys, they didn't go to school to become a brain surgeon or cellular engineer. They went to school to learn law, right? They just, they sometimes go with whoever sounds the sexiest, and they call their one friend in law enforcement and say, who would you hire? And the law enforcement officer goes, I'd hire this guy over here. And I go, that's a former law enforcement officer preaching the same bad story as you did. It's like, wrong person, right? Go talk to the engineers that developed it. Go do your homework. Do like we do. Go sit down with the CEO of BitTorrent like we did, and sit down with their engineers and take the time to do it right. And if you do, you'll find that sometimes the world isn't what everybody thinks it is. And I always say, but there is one rule of thumb I have in everything, and it's on a poster here in our office. It says, incompetence doesn't mean conspiracy theory, because it just means people are incompetent.
Yes.
But I'm not saying we're the best at everything, but we're pretty good at some things, and we know the answers.
You're pretty well up there.
We understand this at a level most people don't. But I got a meeting to talk about cellular stuff with some people that are here, and I appreciate you, and good luck with what you're doing, and reach out anytime. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all your time. Have a great day.
Thanks. Talk soon.